Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so yes, McLaren fan, McLaren tragic, have been for a while, hence the McLarens on my wall behind me. And yes, I was celebrating a little bit yesterday. So thank you for that. It's great to be back at conferences, even if virtually. And where else can you do a conference and be in your slippers? It's pretty comfortable here. I will also, though, just apologize in advance that I do have landscapers in. They are doing stuff with concrete. They do have noisy machinery. They're all at the back of the house at the moment, so hopefully you won't hear a thing. But if you do, my apologies in advance. So as Sam said, I'm CTO at Marketplacer. We are a software company based here in Melbourne. And I've been at Marketplacer for 5 years now. So I started out when it was a very different business from what it is today. So back when I started, it was very much a startup, and the business was really focused on running marketplaces. And a lot of people in the business, that was what they were doing. They were working for those marketplace businesses. So Marketplacer, the software company at that point, was 12 engineers, 4 designers, 1 support person, and that was it. And we also had finance, so shared with some of those businesses. And also we had a sales team as well. So the sales team was 1 person, just to clarify. So when I say team, that might be making it seem a little more grand than it actually was. But if you fast forward to today, then a lot has changed. So the product and technology team, which I'm part of, we're over 50 people. So we've hired people to do testing, and product managers, and user researchers, and more importantly, we've got customers as well, which is really exciting. And they're paying customers. And what we did over the years was that we had, a few goes at finding the right customer segment, and now we've found really good traction with enterprise customers. And the thing about enterprise customers and large customers in general is that they do have changing expectations of us as a software provider than what we had in the early days. So what I'm talking about today is what that's meant for us as a product delivery organization. So I'm a software developer by background. So I've worked across small, medium businesses in the UK, in Asia, and here in Australia. But before I joined Marketplacer, so immediately before, I spent a couple of years working for pretty big businesses, so businesses with thousands of employees. So I do understand a little bit about the mindset of big enterprise and how things get done, and what works well for a smaller business doesn't necessarily work well for a large enterprise. So when I came back to a much smaller business again, it was a bit of a reset and a bit of a mental kind of change to think about how a small business operates. One of the things I really enjoyed was the ability to make decisions again. When you're in a much larger business, you've got lots of people you need to talk with, you've got meetings and hierarchy, and decisions can take quite a long time. It did take a little bit of time to reset that muscle memory. So a few weeks of, who should I speak to about getting approval for this? Or can I do that? And, eventually I broke the habit of not having to ratify every decision with a cast of thousands. And I started, moving fast again. And that's really a lot about what a startup is about. It is liberating to be back in the world where you can move fast and break things. That famous motto which Mark Zuckerberg used around Facebook. Obviously, we don't want to break things deliberately, but certainly moving fast, having the pace, having the agility is really important. So when you're a startup, that's fairly easy because you all fit in one room. You hear everything that's going on. You hear all the conversations. You know that you have to iterate on your business model, on your customer market fit, on your technology in order to actually be able to survive before the money runs out. So with a startup, that comes very naturally. Although at this point, I probably should admit that we weren't traditionally kind of a startup. Marketplace had actually grown out of a business called Bike Exchange, which was and is a very successful marketplace for buying and selling bikes. So Bike Exchange had been around at this point for about 8 or 9 years. So the software we were working on had been around for that time as well. So although the team were working on this platform and evolving it, it did have a heritage. That's how you put kindly, that's how you talk about legacy software. It's got heritage. And but it was pretty well architected in general. It had good unit test coverage. It had a good deployment pipeline. And in general, the team were fairly comfortable working on it. The other thing which set us apart from a real kind of day one startup was that we had a revenue stream. We had customers, people using the platform, but also unusually, those customers were in the same office as us. So if we wanted to get feedback from our customers around how a change landed, we could just wander over to their desk and ask them. Or more likely, they would tell you when you were on your way back from a meeting to your desk or to the break room or wherever you happened to be. So you'd certainly know about the things that were happening. So the marketplace of today, however, is quite different from the marketplace then. So we've grown significantly. So we've had investment from a number of big organizations, so Salesforce Ventures, from Woolworths investment arm, and we've also grown in terms of the number of people. Marketplace is actually now separated out from the businesses which run on the platform, so it's just purely a software company. It's had that investment. We're about 130 people now across Australia and the USA. We work with one of the 10 largest businesses in Australia. We've got 5 more ASX 200 customers. And what we found is that what worked then when we were in South Melbourne and all in the same room doesn't necessarily translate now. But what we do want to do is retain that agility, the ability to move quickly, but also not to break things. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So first of all, I wanted to go through challenges. So these are the things which we deal with day to day, and things which have changed for us over the years. And then I'll talk through a little bit about our values and the things that have enabled us to meet those challenges. So the first thing I wanted to touch on was security. So this is a big one, and you know, a lot of change has happened in this space. Not to say that we were insecure before, but that our focus has changed. So back in the day, we had good processes around the security of our platform. So secure engineering and making sure that dependencies were updated and we were getting pen tests done, things like that. But what we didn't have was a larger organizational view on information security. And as you may know about information security, usually one of the weakest links is people, and people doing things probably inadvertently, which put the security of information at risk. So what we needed to do was put in a more formal information security program and process and management system to make sure that we were confident that the information we hold, whether that's our information or information on behalf of our customers, is kept secure. I'm pleased to say that we've recently, well, I don't have the certificate in hand. I wish I did, I could show it to you, but we've been certified to ISO 27001, which is an international standard around information security. Now, the thing about that process is that for us, it was a 9-month project. So we started that in January of this year, and we've just received the notification that the audit's been successful and we'll be getting that certificate. But also, it's not just a technical change. It goes across the entire business, and it requires a lot of change from people who this may not be for them the most important thing and the biggest priority for them. So being able to get people to change behavior, change processes, change practices was a really big job. It can take 12 months or more for organizations to go through this. So I'm pretty pleased that we managed to do it in just 9 months. And the way we did that was twofold. So one was we didn't just have one person whose job it was and said, you're the person who does this, go ahead and do it. We brought together a coalition of people with different skills from across the business and invested all of them in that. So that was part of it. The other was having a common goal, and a goal which spoke to everybody, because it's not, as I say, it's not just a technical change. Sure, it helps us in terms of our technology development, but it's also a big win for our customers. So being able to talk about why this is important for the whole organization and not just one group was really important in being able to get that change done. But the reason we chose ISO 27001 was because it's not prescriptive as a standard. So it's got lots of control objectives in there and things to meet, but it doesn't tell you how to meet those objectives. The actual policies and procedures and so on that you put in place are defined by you. So we were able to customize that for our environment, for our way of working, and made sure that it fit in with the way that we wanted to do things. So a related topic to this is around compliance and regulatory compliance with state, national, international regulators, particularly around data privacy. So May 2018, the European GDPR came into effect, required lots of things from lots of different companies, from us as well. We were a small business at the time and still are. The difference is, though, that as your customers get bigger, there's a difference between doing the right thing and proving that you're doing the right thing. So the evidence collection, being able to do all of that documentation is really, really important. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut here. It's a lot of work. And my advice is really to do what we did as well with the information security work, which is bring together people from across the business and set them with a common goal. So the second kind of challenge or area of focus that we spoke about was communication. So back in the day, when I started, we moved fast, and yes, sometimes we broke things, not intentionally, of course, and usually not actually because of regressions or bugs, although they did happen. Usually it was because we were releasing something new or changing something, and the customers weren't expecting it. So from their point of view, it was broken because it no longer worked in the way that it used to. Now, as I said, we were all in the same office at that time, so a quick yell across the room or an email would usually sort that out. Back then, we had one person doing support for all of our platform users, whereas now we have a team of 25 people across implementation, support, and customer success. So if we roll out something which customers aren't expecting, then the customer teams are the ones who feel the pain. And what we don't want to do is for that to happen. So the other thing to mention there is we also have customers now who have contractual terms with us that we have to give them notice when major changes are happening. So, all of this seems to be, against our ability to move fast. So what we've tried to do over the years is multiple different ways of improving our internal communication as well as our external communication. So transparency has always been very important to us. And from my very first weeks at the organization, we were doing emails out to all of the platform users about changes that were coming. But the problem with the emails was that nobody ever actually read them. So we felt better about ourselves, but it didn't really help. And then a few years ago, we tried doing an internal kind of showcase. So all of the delivery teams would stand up and talk about what they were delivering. Unfortunately, they didn't really enjoy that. They felt like they were on show and being, being judged for what they were or weren't delivering. So then we said, well, why don't we have the whole company do it? And we'll do a whole company showcase. Every team, every department will talk about what they're doing. It was too long. It wasn't, people were saying it's not relevant. So then we tried other things. So in Slack, we have a changelog channel. So all of the merges to the main branch, they will generate a record in the changelog channel. We also implemented a convention called conventional commits, which is a way of structuring your commit messages to make it easy and make them consistent. So even though we're now across multiple repositories and not just a big monolith, each of those messages come through and generate an automated changelog. And that's still going, that still gives us value, but we were trying other things as well. So we had a weekly slide deck which went out with every single change. And again, it was too long and nobody was reading it. So we've settled now on where we are, which is using a company-wide product roadmap, which we put on monday.com. And what happens is every fortnight, at least, all of the product teams will update that. Everybody has access to it so they can all see what's happening. And for us at the moment, this strikes the right balance of enough information that people can look at without communication overload. But the underlying point is that we've tried different things and we've settled on something which works for us right now, but we don't know if that's going to be the right thing in the future. So things will change, our needs will change, and in the future we'll also change how we do things. Another thing we've put in place is what we call a launch wall. So the launch wall is a weekly meeting which all the teams attend if they're releasing something that week. And the intention of it is it's akin to a stand-up, really. It's short, it's to the point, and any discussion gets taken offline. But it's a good way for people to know what's happening, get the heads up around what's coming up. But again, we'll continue experimenting with that and we'll see how things go. The final thing we've done around communications and had to do is that we've tried to separate out deploys from releases. So the physical act of deploying code into a production environment versus the commercial act of actually that change going live to a customer. And this has become more and more important. So the way we work is fairly typical, is that we have a branching strategy where all of the features and fixes get developed on a branch, and then they get merged back into the main branch, and then that will deploy it out into a staging environment, smoke tests will run, and then it'll get into production. But what we've found is that with having to do things like a launch wall, maybe you're having to write up a knowledge base article, put it into a dashboard, maybe do an email out, and those contractual commitments as well around notice periods, is that the lag between code being done and it being released has really blown out. And rather than having code sitting in a branch, rotting, going stale, what we've tried to do is really push the idea that deploying the code is fine, but if you can separate that out from the actual release by using something like a feature flag, that you're able then to move on and then release that when you've actually done all of those release activities. Then the next topic I should talk about is monitoring and SLAs. So luckily for us, we've generally had good monitoring in the past, unlike some other organizations I've been part of, where the first time you realize that your service is down is when a customer calls you. So we've had generally a pretty good way of doing monitoring and alerting, and we've had systems in place for that for quite a long time. What has changed, however, as our customers have got bigger, is that the expectations rise around a couple of areas. So one of those is transparency. So the transparency of how the system is performing and the uptime, because people, rather than just trusting that we're doing the right thing, they also want to have the visibility of that. Also harsher penalties. So, bigger companies generally will have harsher penalties if your availability isn't there. So the expectation hasn't risen around availability per se, but more around how we report on that. The other thing that's changed is that there's now more expectation around performance as well as availability. So response times, latency, and those kinds of things, particularly around API calls. So how have we done this? So as I mentioned, we've had kind of good tools in place for quite a while to manage this internally. So we use Datadog for logging, and a lot of information goes into Datadog. We use synthetic monitoring, platform called wormly.com, and then we use PagerDuty as managing incidents and orchestrating a lot of that together. So we've had all of those tools in place, and that's how we do our internal monitoring and availability and performance. So what we're now working on is putting that together as a dashboard that customers can use as well, using exactly the same tools. Because if we get it right for ourselves, getting it right for customers is a quick follow-on. The next thing we've had to look at is growth. As the company grows and the customers grow, naturally the team grows as well. And of course, that's a good thing. It's great to have more people. But it's important to note that more people doesn't mean getting more done. And it's certainly not a linear relationship between people and amount of stuff done. And this is particularly important, when you think about the fact that between June 2020 and June 2021, for our business, the product and technology team doubled. And it didn't just double, it doubled at a time that our entire working lives are being thrown upside down by a global pandemic. In January 2020, all of our team, product and technology, were all based in Melbourne. We all had an office that we went to probably 4 days a week for most of us. We'd done some working from home. We used to have, 1 day at least working from home for most people. But, fast forward to today, and we've got multiple locations across different states in Australia. We're just kicking off our USA product and technology team as well. And we're all working from home most of the time. Even when we're allowed back in the office, majority of people are working remotely. So what we've had to focus on here is a couple of things. So one is onboarding processes and being more deliberate about our onboarding processes, because it's, more people coming on board, you've got to have a better system for doing that. And I don't just mean the logistics of, getting a laptop to people and accounts set up, and, that's important, absolutely. But thinking about, on day one, do they have a background of the business and what we're trying to achieve and how the work they're doing fits into the bigger picture? Do they have someone who they can pair with to be able to get their environment set up and be able to commit code? Do they understand, the rest of the team? And again, with the remote aspect now, this is ever more important, and it's more than just day one now. It's now making sure that ongoing, people who have joined the business who have never met their colleagues in person, that they actually feel connected. So making deliberate decisions around making sure that certain sessions that we do as a team, that we give people space to be able to chit-chat about things, making sure some of the teams do, fun activities, and that we support that, and we recognize that, work time doesn't always have to be about work, and the social aspect of that and making space for that and encouraging that is really, really important. The other aspect of this is organizational design. And we've deliberately gone for smaller teams. We prefer to have more smaller teams, have those fairly independent of each other and empowered. So our rule of thumb is 5 people, plus or minus 2, so anywhere between 3 and 7 people. And typically our structure has a 6-month shelf life. And 6 months for us came about because we have a natural tension between the desire to retain stability in the teams versus changing business needs and changing team size. So we organize around value streams. So a value stream being something that creates value for your business rather than a product or a particular technology. So we've got 6 value streams at the moment, and we organize our teams around those. But what's been really important is that those value streams change. So the 6 streams we look at right now are not the same 6 streams we were looking at 12 months ago even, because the business has evolved. Some streams are now less important, some streams are now more important, or have suddenly surfaced. And so we have to sometimes restructure teams, and every 6 months seems to be about the sweet spot for us. The thing about having lots of small teams, though, is that it becomes harder as the product gets bigger and the team's focus narrows. It gets harder to have visibility over the whole system. And that can lead to breaking things because you make changes and don't consider the broader system impacts of that. I'm not talking necessarily about changes which a regression test might pick up, where you change a field here and it affects something over there. More likely, it's something like adding something new and not considering how does that fit into the entire ecosystem. So as an example, if we add a new field on our checkout, which says company name, okay, great, we've captured that on the front end. Where does that now go? Does that go to our portal that sellers access? Does it go to CSV exports? Does it go to API calls and any other multitude of places that this data may get accessed? So thinking about those broader system impacts. And there's various ways that you can, we've tried to get people to have a broader system view. So one is that we have a checklist that is in our issue template, which gets people just a bit of a prompt to think about, does this affect these other bits of the product? Another is making sure that work gets kicked off properly. So we don't just kind of go straight into solution mode with the developer saying, okay, right, I'm going to write some code, but trying to get the right people in the room virtually to talk about what might happen, the system impacts, and so on. And then the last is that launch ball that I mentioned earlier. That's a bit of a safety net because if we're picking things up at that stage, probably a little bit too late, but it's still better than before, but than after we've gone live. So a couple of people asking in the chat around value streams. So I will just outline what our value streams are at the moment. So as a marketplace, we have three main customers we deal with. So there's operators, so people who run a marketplace. So think bike exchange, for instance. The sellers who sell on a marketplace. So think a bike shop in that instance. And then the shoppers, so the people who are the end users, consumers, the people who are buying things off the marketplace. So those are three of our value streams. So we say, is this something which the shopper wants, the seller wants, or the operator wants? And then that will go into each of those teams. And then our other three value streams. So one is our connections platform into other commerce systems. So we plug into other commerce systems. One is technical alliances, so integrations into payment gateways, logistics, and so on. And then the third is our data platform. So at the moment, those are the 6 value streams for us. And an example of one which has come up recently is that connections platform. Probably 2 years ago, 18 months ago, that wasn't something which was necessarily a value stream for us, but now it is. So we've organized teams around that. So the last kind of challenge that I wanted to walk through was money. As the team grows, we get more expensive, and we have to be able to account for our time in multiple different ways. And we've always had to do that to some extent. Probably one of my first jobs when I joined the business was to pick up the ATO research and development tax incentive. And part of that is measuring people's time. What did you work on for how long and so on. And there was a very manual process. So it was, finance team leads going together through Git logs, through pull requests, through holiday schedules, and building out a timetable of what everyone was doing at any particular time. And that's laborious when you're doing it for 12 months for 15 people. If you're trying to do it for 50 people, it's almost impossible. So what we did was we put together, we bit the bullet. We said we're going to do timesheeting. Enough of us had had a terrible experience of timesheeting that we hadn't wanted to do it. You do the timesheet dance where you log in every week and you have to try and remember what did I work on, and it's another system and it's friction and nobody likes it. We ended up going with a system called MikaBot, and the reason was because we can meet people where they are, which is in Slack. So what the bot does is every morning it asks you, what did you work on yesterday? You pick a couple of projects, put some hours against it, and away you go. And if you do the same thing multiple days in a row, it'll say to you, you've done this a few days. Do you want to just keep adding it in the future? And you can say, yes, please. So that's been really helpful for us because it's reduced the friction. It's taken away some of that pain of having to do timesheeting, but it gives us the accurate information at the tail end to be able to report on that for things like the ATO, for capitalization of software expenses, for all sorts of reasons why that's important. So those are some of the things that have happened as we've grown bigger, some of the challenges we've faced. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the values that we hold dear as we've gone through this. So transparency is one of those, and we talked a little bit about this in the communications section. When you're small, it's kind of easy because you're all in the same room, pretty much. You can talk to each other, you can hear what's going on. As you get bigger and you're no longer sitting in the same room, maybe you're virtual, it can be hard. And some of the things we hear when you ask teams to share and be transparent is, well, they hold their cards close to their chest because, like, well, what if I show this thing which isn't finished yet and people don't like it? Or even worse, what if I show this to people and they do like it and they go and sell it before it's ready? Or maybe things like, what if I put a date on this initiative and then it changes because it was more complex or harder, or it was bigger, or more things came up. So the way that we try and tackle this is through trust. And some of you will hopefully be aware of Google's work from 2015, where they looked at the ingredients for team effectiveness. And the number one out of those was psychological safety. And that's really thinking about the team level dynamic. Here we're talking about kind of cross team and cross department, but the same holds true. If engineers trust that sales aren't going to throw them under the bus by selling something that doesn't exist, or if marketing trusts that a product manager is not going to completely upend the delivery schedule when they've got a marketing calendar ready to go, that engenders trust. And allows people to be transparent around what they're doing. Another aspect of transparency that we've valued, so we used to have a fortnightly tech leads meeting, and we used to sit in a room and plot things, and it sounds very nefarious, but we were coming up with ideas for how we wanted the teams to run. And at some point we said, well, why are we deciding this when this affects everybody in the team? Why don't we get the rest of the team involved? And we really started to embrace like a culture of openness, where those discussions we were having about, what should we do next? How should we restructure the team? What should we be doing over there? We actually did with the entire product and technology team. And that culture of openness meant that we actually got rid of that fortnightly tech leads meeting because there was nothing to talk about. We were already talking about it with the whole team. It also encouraged engagement. So it meant that people saw the problems we were trying to solve, and they were able to jump in and help us solve those. And we've also continued with that as we've moved remote. So, obviously in Slack, that's where a lot of our conversations happen these days. So we're now able to do that within Slack. And the majority of our channels are open by default. So all of our team channels, people can jump in, see what teams are up to, contribute, and so on. So unless there's a good reason to, hide something, and usually there isn't, then we try and make that open by default. So that also then comes across to one of the other things that we really value, which is continuous improvement. And anyone can suggest a better way, and they're encouraged to do it as well. And it doesn't matter if you don't know if it's going to work or not. You might think it will, you don't really know. Our attitude is very much try it. And if it doesn't work, doesn't matter, we'll try something else. And we'll just keep trying until, we find the right thing, or in reality, that thing becomes less important. So a couple of examples there. I talked earlier around our release communications and going from the emails to the showcases to Monday and so on. And, that's something which we know it will continue to evolve. We tried something, we said, well, we find that there's a gap here. Let's try and fill that gap. Let's try something. And when it became obvious that maybe it wasn't working as well as it used to, we'd change and we'd try something new. And another example of that is, as a team 5 years ago, we used to do retros on a Friday, and there were 15 of us, And that's still a reasonable size to do a whole team retro, because the things you're talking about are generally things which affect everybody. And there's still the kind of level of trust amongst the team to be able to be open about that. But as the team got bigger, what we found was that that became less relevant because people weren't facing the same problems. And so you end up with, on the one hand, the topics became very trivial because they were the only things which bound people together. And on the other hand, you just had a small number of voices who were being heard all the time. By this point, we'd also grown from 2 to 3 to however many teams, and each of those teams was doing their own retro. So actually the value of doing the Friday retro as a whole team was diminished. But we said also, what, we enjoy it. Like a Friday afternoon, you get together at the end of the week, it's quite nice. So how can we retain that without necessarily it being a retro? So we started making it more informational and pushing information out rather than discussion based. And that worked. But then we realized that there wasn't enough content really to do it weekly. So we moved it fortnightly. And then people said, oh, it's a bit late, 4 o'clock on a Friday. I'm starting to wind down. Can we make it a bit earlier in the day? So it's now 11 o'clock every fortnight. So it's changed a lot since its original incarnation. But what's important is we didn't just say, well, we like retro, we want to keep doing it, we've always done it, and therefore we should keep doing it. We actually challenged ourselves to say, is this still valuable? Is it still useful? If not, let's stop doing it and let's try and find something else to do instead. And that's really key to the way that we work. So let's think about decisions. So decisions are, really important to us, obviously, making decisions. We've talked about speed and being able to make decisions quickly. And that organizational design we've put in place with small teams is really designed to be autonomous, or allow teams to be autonomous. So we do have a management structure. There's myself and VPs and engineering managers and so on. But our job is not to make decisions. Our job is to support the teams. The teams are the ones who make the decisions because they're the ones who have the best knowledge. They're the ones who are working with customers, who are working with the platform, doing the technology, doing whatever they do. So what we try and do is push those decisions down. If you've seen the Spotify engineering videos, you might be familiar with the concept of alignment and autonomy. So autonomy is around the ability to make the changes and make the decisions. And the alignment piece is really important because that's about what are we doing. So you set the big vision, you set the big goals, but then the teams are responsible for figuring out how you actually deliver on that. So for us, we have a big company goal. We also have, for each of those value streams that we've created, goals for each of those teams as well. So high-level visions for each of those teams. What are the things important in each of those value streams? And we're also now working on getting each of those teams to come up with more medium-term goals so that they know within themselves their direction. And obviously that then gets ratified by the product and technology leadership, and we help guide them on that. But ultimately, it's up to the teams to set their own goals. The other thing in terms of decisions is around technical architecture. So for us, we don't have an architect role. It's not that architecture isn't important. It absolutely is. But for us, architecture is a function rather than a role. So we have each of those groups, those teams in the value streams, and cutting across that, we have working groups. So we have working groups for each of the areas that we work on: back end, front end, infrastructure, data, and so on. And those working groups, they don't have a lead. They have a coordinator, so someone who makes sure the meeting happens and makes sure that the boards are up to date and so on, but nobody actually leads those areas. So we have groups of work, those people working on those things. And they also have Slack channels. So outside of their fortnightly meetings, there's Slack channels where people come up with those discussions, and sometimes they'll escalate then and kind of get into the meeting if you need to have a face-to-face, but otherwise things day-to-day get solved in those Slack channels. The autonomy also extends to how people work and how teams work. So we work on the basis of inputs and outputs. So a little bit like a function in computing, you have a defined input and a defined output. And that's how we set up our teams as well. So the defined inputs are the goals for those teams. The outputs are things like making sure the roadmap is updated, doing communication to customers and so on. But how they actually execute on that day to day is up to those individual teams. So we don't dictate that to them. That's just something which those teams are able to do. Now, of course, autonomy also requires a few things in terms of supporting people. So we strongly believe in cross-functional teams. That is, that each team has the range of skills in order to be able to work autonomously. We actually used to hire for people who could do everything, and really come up with these full stack developers. But what we found was that as the system gets bigger, that's really hard to sustain. So what we hire for is the ability for people to learn. So the way we put it is that we don't expect you to know everything, but we do expect you to be willing to learn anything. So you might be a Ruby specialist, for instance, but sometimes you might need to dabble in some TypeScript. And we wouldn't just put you on a TypeScript project with no support. You need to be able to have the support to be able to do that. So one of our values as a business is be your best. And under that, we have two of those points, which is be a good human and be curious and grow. And those are really important for us when it comes to this support topic. So you've got to be comfortable asking, for help. Whether you're the newest engineer or the CTO, if you don't know something, be comfortable to ask. And I try and set the tone, and all of the leads and everyone else, they all ask questions on Slack because nobody knows everything. And it's not a sign of weakness to not know something. I always talk about the 15-minute rule, which is you've got to try something for 15 minutes. If you don't know how to do it, try doing it for 15 minutes. But after 15 minutes, you have to ask for help because we don't want people just to ask for help at the first drop of a hat. You've got to have a go at solving it. But by the same token, if it's going to take you days to solve a thing and somebody could solve it for you in half an hour, ask for help. So the kind of opposite aspect of that is willingness to help, of course. You've got to have people who want to get out there and help. And you'll see this all the time on Slack, where people ask questions and people will jump in with a Hangouts link and say, let's work through this together. Even if they don't know the answer, they're willing to jump in and help people out. And the reason that this works is because we don't measure people by lines of code or number of commits or whatever it might be. We measure people by impact and the impact they have. And we grow, we either succeed or fail as a collective. It's not about individual responsibility. So we've also encouraged this in Slack. We have a shout-outs channel. A lot of the things you see in shout-outs channel are people helping, saying thank you to person X for helping me out with something. So last couple of things I'll go through. We really value owning your own process. So staying one step ahead. So the thing I talked about earlier with ISO 27001, that was us staying ahead of the requirements from our customers to have that in place. The other thing is around SLAs, for instance. We want to go in there on the front foot for any negotiations to say, this is how we operate, these are our standards, and we want you to accept our standards where possible. Not to say that we won't negotiate with customers, but let's go in there on the front foot. A couple more things. So tools, Kat talked about this earlier in her talk, the importance of having the right tooling. And for us, this is twofold. So one is sometimes we invest in tools at the time level. So we have a number of various Slack bots which assign pull requests or come up with change logs, or one which books out test environments, things like that. And they're things that we've said, well, that's valuable for all of us because it saves time and energy and it's worth investing in. The other is paid software, and my advice would always be, if you get value out of a piece of software, pay for it. Like, I've been in organizations where people have been through tortuous processes to avoid paying for a particular piece of software, and they'll do suboptimal processes in order to save a few dollars, and it's just not worth it. There are good free tools out there, of course. The majority of our team use VS Code or Vim or Emacs or other free tools for their daily work. But there are people who prefer paid IDEs. And if that's what makes them productive and comfortable and happy, it's worth paying for, rather than forcing them to go to a tool just because it's free. The other thing on that is around overlap for tools. So we actually have different tools in the same space. So we use Trello and Notion and Monday, which are all very similar. And we also use Lucidchart and Miro, again, which have a lot of overlap. And we do try and consolidate on these. But what we've found is that sometimes, people have invested in one particular tool and then you're trying to get them to migrate to another, and just the change fatigue from that is really massive. We do try and consolidate those, but we don't do it at the expense of people's productivity. So just a couple of things to finish off. So stability is another big thing for us. A lot of these things we're talking about are changes. So we try not to overload people with too many changes. We're aware that each of the changes has cumulative effect on people. So we do try and minimize the changes where possible, or at least stage them out so they're not all happening at once. And then the other thing is around immutable teams. So for us, we talked about that organizational design. We try and keep them stable, because if teams, you can't change a team, they're immutable. Like if you add somebody, if you take somebody away, it's a new team. You've got new dynamics, you've got new people in there, new things to get used to. So being really conscious about that team stability, and as I said, balancing that with the need to change. So just to wrap up, change, is difficult. You go to traditional change models like Kotter's 8 stages and so on. They're all focused around big organizational changes, mergers and acquisitions and redundancies and those kinds of things. What we're talking about here is micro changes, lots and lots of little changes. Not to say that we won't ever do big organizational changes, but for us, managing lots and lots of little changes is easier than doing one big change program. And that continual change means that we can move fast. It means hopefully we don't break things as well. So that was it. That's what I wanted to cover. I'm a couple of minutes over, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
And there are questions. Thank you so much for that, Andy. It's super interesting to see inside these awesome companies and how they all work. Okay, so lots of people seem very curious about the 6-month changing of things. So the first question is from Anonymous, and it says, as I completely stuff up my screens, with team changes every 6 months, how do you integrate junior level hires who may struggle with learning the platform and technologies in that time span? Do you have to look towards more specific focuses?
Yeah, that's really important. And bringing people up to speed is a huge part of that. And so, 6 months is a reasonable time frame for somebody to get somewhat familiar, but we are very conscious of that as well. And as I say, the team dynamics. So 6 months realistically is more of a tweak, I would say. I mean, you probably, for us, we won't do a wholesale change where we throw everything out of the window, throw it up in the air and hope it comes back down again. What we will do is tweak. So we'll say, okay, well, we need maybe a bit more focus over here. Who would like to consider moving into that team? And it's something I didn't mention too much, but where possible, we also try and get people to give us their views on which team they want to be in as well, and get that as an input. So what we do is we send out a Google form, 6 teams or 9 teams or whatever it is, and say, rank them 1 through 9 and tell us which one you want to be in. And we'll try and get your first preference or your second preference, but we won't guarantee it, and try and build it that way. So that stability absolutely is important. And particularly if somebody does have a mentor in that team, we'll definitely try and keep them together.
Okay, so the next question, kind of following on that from Gary, it says, if teams change every 6 months, do you find you don't stay in the performing phase for long before you kind of roll back to forming? And how do you cater for that?
Yeah, look, that's really important. And that's part of the reason we do try and limit those changes, because of exactly that. As soon as you change the team, as I say, even if you just kind of one person leaves or one person joins, you do have to relearn the team dynamics and the structure and going back through that forming and norming stage. So that is, why we try and push it out as often as possible. 6 months being our kind of rule of thumb. I don't think we've ever done it more regularly than 6 months. Realistically, it might be 9 months. We don't have a calendar appointment to say, go change the teams. But we just find, by that kind of time period, we're starting to feel the cracks from the previous structure, and we need to make some changes.
Ding, 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 ding. 6 months, change teams. So again, sort of similar questions. How do you, and it seems the opposite is what you're saying. This question says, how do you manage change fatigue and ownership if the teams and the value streams change every 6 months?
Yeah, look, really important. Yeah, definitely. Change fatigue is definitely real. And, as I say, those kind of micro changes that we do, whether it be, you're implementing the launch wall and now you've got to do that, or whatever it might be, each of those, we're conscious of not just doing 10 of them all at the same time, because it's just too much, and trying to space them out where we can. But even, with the team structures, I think, again, even if it's just, okay, one person moves, or a couple of people move teams, for us, that's what we would consider a change of team. So that is a bit of a tweak. So again, I would say in the time that I've been at Marketplace, there's probably been, I'm going to say 4, maybe 5 major team changes where we've just completely changed the structure and a lot of people have moved. So that's probably one a year, given that I've been there for about 5 years.
Next question's from Reese, and he says, are working groups formal? Are they ad hoc and formed as needed or more mandated? And how do we decide what is the granularity of the group?
Yeah, so the groups are, they're semi-formal. They're not formal in terms of membership. They are open to anyone to attend. So the back-end working group, for instance, there's a certain core of people who will attend those. So most of our tech leads will, in the appropriate areas, will attend those. But there isn't a mandate that people have to attend. And so people can attend those as they need. And we have spun up new ones. So we've had back end, front end, and infrastructure for quite a while. We fairly recently spun up the data one, because that was an area we wanted to focus on. And I'm sure as we continue to grow, the granularity of that will change as well. But that's something which we'd want the whole team to be a part of deciding. We'd kind of go, okay, well, the cracks are starting to show with the existing structure. How should we change that?
Next question's from Ed, and he wants to know, what are some of your fun activities that you have done that aren't a bit cringy?
Oh gosh, fun activities. Look, I think, each of the teams do different things. So they will, play Jackbox or things like that, good online games for a bit of a light relief. We do have a weekly quiz, which we used to do in the office and is now online. And there's probably 10 or 15 people who get involved in that every week. So we just read out the SMH or age quiz and see if we can get a full score of 30 points, which is rare. We've also had, kind of company-wide ones where we'll do things and send things out to people's houses, or even just at the team level. If it's a $40, $50 Uber Eats voucher or something, and then a team gets together and has lunch together, or things like that. They're all good ways of just doing something a bit different from daily work.
Cool. Our next series of questions seem to be around meetings. So the first question from Eric, he says, when you mention opening the meeting to the whole team, does it become a problem that people feel like they have an obligation to go to all the meetings, even though they might not feel very relevant?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. It is a really good point. I think we've got certain meetings which, there's a general expectation people will come to. So that kind of end of fortnight update is really the only one for the whole team that we would expect that people turn up to. But even that, we're actually rethinking at the moment. I mentioned that we're spinning up our US product and technology team. Doing it at 11 o'clock on a Friday in Melbourne time may not work. It may be out of hours for some people. So as we get more into asynchronous and real kind of cross time zone working, we're actually rethinking even that now. What are the real things that people actually need to be there for? But probably the main thing is at each of those team levels that they have the ability to come up with changes. When I talked about the tech leads meeting and that we just opened it up to the whole team, that was at our retro, and that was when we were still 15, 20 people, so it was pretty easy to get everybody there. But as you grow, that becomes harder, and more happens over things like Slack rather than in person.
Might mush these next two questions together because they're very closely related, and from Patrick and Richard around balancing the time between getting together to come up with the solution in a meeting versus actually working on the solution. And then almost everyone has been involved in unproductive or unnecessary meetings. Can you elaborate on how you qualified whether a meeting was necessary or not, and any literature which influenced you?
Yeah, look, that's it's a really good question. Because I've been in companies where literally 9 to 5 was back-to-back meetings, and then the kind of expectation was, well, beyond that, now you go home and do your actual work, and that just doesn't work. So one thing I like to do, and I encourage the team to do, and I hope I set an example with, is not attending meetings if they don't say why they're happening. If there's no agenda, if there's no what are you actually trying to achieve from this meeting, then I will gently, usually, push back and ask, what are you trying to achieve? Do I need to be here? Those kinds of things, and make sure that when I do set up meetings with people, that I try and elaborate on what am I trying to achieve through this meeting, and also be very deliberate about using things like optional. Just because you get a meeting invite, you don't have to be there. But yeah, look, it is a challenge, particularly with whole team meetings. So as I say, we're trying to get better at could this be a Slack conversation? Could this be something where we put together things on a Miro board for a week, and then we come together for 10 minutes to really discuss it, rather than the whole ideation being 2 hours. So still work in progress, I would say.
And in the wonders of technology, I have completely lost audio and am relying entirely on visual signals and reading Andy's lips at this point. But we'll just bung in this one last question, which says, a lot of this seems much broader than the scope of a CTO. This is from Ashley. Is this limited thinking on my part, or is this acronym something other than Chief Technology Officer?
Oh, wow. Yeah, great one. Look, Chief Technology Officer is a very overloaded job title. I could do a whole talk just on that, to be honest. And, my role, as I see it, I look after technology and product. So, essentially half the business or so is in those two areas. And for a software business, they're both pretty important. So I get involved in all sorts of things I maybe shouldn't, but ultimately organizational dynamics, creating software, creating products is a people game. We like to think that it's technology, and, writing code is obviously important, and doing all of the technical activities. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is about people getting together, talking, collaborating. And if I can make that easier, then hopefully I'm doing my job correctly.